Hi, everybody, and welcome to week 2 for MARK9057. Tonight, we're going to be talking all about strategy. So let's talk about a little bit what we did during week 1. So congratulations to everybody. Just about every single person was able to join our G Plus community and to provide your introductions. And I've loved seeing how much commentary is going on between everybody. You know, you all bring such an amazingly huge range of experience and goals and what you're trying to get out of this course. And I know I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it again. The more you engage in this community, the more you are sharing information and commenting on other people's content and their observations, the more you're going to get out of this class. So thank you already for being such an engaged group. I think it's going to be an awesome session. We looked at some social media statistics, and that's going to be something that I'm going to be introducing throughout the entire course, of course. But it was important for you to get a kind of an understanding, like a level set of where we sit and what the demographic is and what the kind of the user base is in Canada. Wherever possible, of course, I'm going to be trying to get Canadian numbers when it comes to these kinds of different platforms and the demographics and the like. Sometimes it's not going to be possible, and it's going to be from a North American perspective or from a US perspective. So just keep that in mind. Keep that kind of that grain of salt when you're looking at any of those those resources or those that bit of information. So we talked a little bit about strategy, and we gave you an introduction to what I refer to as business design and how we approach things. And, you guys got access to the Cores and Paths article and document. And we're going to be looking at that throughout today as well. And most of you have advised us which book you're going to be choosing for your digital book report. Remember, if you go back into Blackboard, that's going to have the framework for what's to be expected when it comes to delivering your digital book report. I encourage you to get creative. I encourage you to choose something that you may not necessarily have chosen prior to the introduction. But regardless, we want the book report to work for you, right? This is not just about you actually, toward the end of the course, being able to use these different platforms and use them in a way that shows that you've understood kind of the tenets of each one of them. But I really do want to make sure that what you're reading and what you're spending your time on is valuable to you. So there is no cookie cutter. I'm not going to be giving you specific examples of like this blog or that Pinterest board and whatnot beyond what's already shown, because I really don't want you copying anybody else's work. It's a guideline. And I want to see your personality come through. And that's really an important part of this whole project and initiative as well.
So for week 2, we're going to be talking all things strategy. And this is something that we're going to be coming back to over and over and over again throughout the course. I'm going to be asking you to check in on your strategy. I'm going to be asking you to double check your strategy. I'm going to be asking you to revamp your strategy and come back to it and validate it. So I want you to realize that this is an iterative process at times, okay? That sometimes we make assumptions when we start something, but there's definitely, as new information comes to us, sometimes we have to adjust our strategies. So I'm going to be introducing you to tonight to kind of 4 different tools that I would like you to look at and investigate. And we're going to be using these throughout the course. So the first is the Forrester Research's social marketing playbook. So this is going to be an important piece for us because this is actually going to be the framework for the final project. So we're going to be looking at how the 4 different segments that they use in that playbook and how that relates to the work that we're doing in social media marketing. Then we're going to be looking at an article that was written regarding Cores and Paths. And this is an information architecture journal piece that actually helps us look at whatever project that we're looking at. It's not just about websites, it's about whatever project we're attempting to tackle from the inside out. Instead of kind of starting with the homepage and where do you go from there, this is actually about looking at your core content and actually how do you get people to see your core content. Then I'm going to be sharing another resource with you from a great digital strategist by the name of Marie Poulin. And she has graciously shared her content with us from the Digital Strategy School about how to think like a digital strategist. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at Strategizer's business model canvas. So anybody who works in the startup space, so I know we have a few students who work with startups in the technology space, you'll be familiar with the business model canvas. So what we've done is I've adjusted the canvas itself to actually work for us to help us frame how we actually can use this for social media marketing.
So, as I like to say, this will be the no more spray and pray approach to social media marketing. There are no more, oh, let's just try it and see if it goes and we'll have it happen today. And then if it doesn't work, no. What we're going to do, you can check out and see what's working and what's not working in any kind of campaign. And that's called A/B testing. But what we're not going to do is just wing it. Building a strategy takes time and it takes work and it's not easy. We saw this image in last week's slides. And as much as you're creating a strategy for your overall activity for your brand and for your project or your event or whatever it may be, you're also going to be considering some very specific goals and techniques when you're dealing with actually building a strategy for campaigns as well. So they're not mutually exclusive in any stretch of the imagination. So we shouldn't be confusing strategy with tactics, right? Tactics or avenues or platforms are one thing, but the strategies are far richer. And I loved this, finding this image, because I think it actually gives a really great example of all of the different elements that are involved in actually building a comprehensive strategy. It really bothers me when I hear people say, what's your social media strategy? Or what's your digital strategy? Because they're acting as if these are separate entities that exist outside of the business's goals and objectives. And if we're doing it right, that should never be the case. Social media strategies and digital strategies should all benefit the business, and they should all speak to the business's overall goals. If they don't, you're missing the entire point. Social is an avenue. It is not an answer. So here's an example, not to scare you, and I've also included this in week 2's resources in the Google Drive for everybody. But regardless if you're an enterprise or a small business or not-for-profit, a government agency, a financial company, a media company, it doesn't matter what kind of company you are. There's a lot of work involved in actually building a content strategy. You'll have to actually look at this in larger view to understand all these kind of moving parts. But I wanted to give you an example of this and show you this to show you just how comprehensive and just how integrated these conversations should be when we're building this kind of strategy moving forward. So let's talk about a social brand, right? And a social business. And there's a difference. So a social brand is any company, product, or individual that uses social technologies to communicate with social customers, their partners and constituencies, or the general public. And a social business is any company that has an integrated and operationalized social media within every job function internally. We're not going to be focusing in on the conversation about a social business tonight because that really is quite a different conversation. What we're going to be focusing in on is what makes a social brand. Brand being, of course, one that engages with its audience. So what makes a social brand? It engages in dialogue. It's focused in on an external communication scheme. It's all about engagement with the customer. Generally, it's owned by the marketing departments. It is measured simply these days, what we call vanity metrics for the most part, clicks, impressions, reach, likes, comments. And we're going to be talking about measurement a lot throughout the course as well. The budgets for social brand are usually allocated towards agencies or community management resources, Facebook applications, building those blogs, building those frameworks. So that's where budgets usually go in these arenas. And really importantly, there needs to be these very focused elements of relevance. The conversation needs to be relevant to the target. It needs to be relevant to the company's culture, and it also needs to be relevant to the product. So what's the difference between these two brands? On our left, we have Girl Guide cookies. Everybody knows about Girl Guide cookies. We all understand how important they are. We understand how important they are for the Girl Guides organization. They arrive every single year, and there's something really important that happens every single year in that conversation. On the right, we have Fudgios. Fudgios are nice, they're tasty, but we have no other kind of relationship with Fudgios except for that they're Fudgios. So we know here that social really has an impact here, right? The social doesn't only have to be online. It has to be in real life as well. And that makes a big difference. Fudgios, we know them, we'll eat them perhaps, but they don't have the same relationship with us from a consumer perspective as the Girl Guide cookies do. So a social brand behaves in a very specific way. It's about storytelling. We understand the story behind Girl Guide cookies. We understand what Girl Guides are. We understand what they do from a fundraising perspective and how important this is for their programs every year. And it's more natural for some companies than others. For some companies, it's really difficult to actually build a story along the lines of their brand or their company or their product. Some of them are just more naturally inclined than others. And so that's important to keep in mind when we're talking about brands as well, because some brands really shouldn't be using social for a conversation. We'll talk about that as this conversation goes on as well. So again, how does a social brand behave? The brand has to invest in and believe in their conversation, point blank. They have to commit and be there and do it well if they choose to do it. They realize that conversations can sometimes be controversial. It happens. Not everything is touchy-feely, happy, good. And that can be a good thing for a brand. It can also be very challenging for brand managers. Social brand engages on the consumer on relevant platforms. And what that means is that they understand that not every platform is right for every brand or for every consumer or every part of their consumer base that they have. It does proper planning, but it also executes quickly. And what that means is that they capitalize on those opportunities and they know how to talk to their audience. They don't wait 3 days for approvals. They push out content and make it work in real time. And a social brand also evolves over time. That happens as well. So really importantly, a social brand is one that is authentic, relevant, and resonant. So this is a great example of a social brand that is authentic and resonant, and of course, timely. So in case you don't know what this reference is, it's to the 2013 Super Bowl when there was a blackout in the stadium for 34 minutes. During that time, Oreo sent out this tweet, which just blew up on social. And the reason it was so popular and the reason it resonated so much with everybody, whether you're an Oreo fan or not, is because it was timely and it was completely relevant to one of the biggest media events that we know globally, that being the Super Bowl. You probably also don't know that there was a team of 15 people who were part of both the product side and the agency side that were sitting there ready, and they were making decisions on the fly for what kind of content they were going to be putting out during the Super Bowl. This is one of the most beautiful examples of when a product team and an agency team come together and they trust one another and they put the decision makers in the room together and they actually allow a brand voice to be completely relevant in the moment. So clearly Oreo is actually winning this kind of war. So you can see that they're taking that and they're actually still maintaining this idea of being a social brand throughout their different platforms. So this is a snapshot of some of the ridiculous commentary that Oreo and the team have to put up with people on their Facebook page. But if you look at their tone, they are doing it in a respectful and appreciative way, and they're ensuring that the voice of the customer is being heard and that they're going to be passing it on to other parts of the organization. So this is a great example of a social brand that's actually doing it really well. So it's not this. If you look at the tweet from Microsoft Canada, you can see that they've reached 14,000 followers, and they thank everyone for joining the conversation. There's no relevance to their business. There's no relevance to the audience. It means absolutely nothing to anybody who's actually reading that. The only people who actually pay attention to that 14K followers are the internal brand people because they think that it means something. Look at the one here from United. They're asking their audience if people have questions about their new ad campaign. Well, I don't think many customers really care about an airline's ad campaign. And I think you can tell from the commentary below how much they don't care about an ad campaign. On the right is IKEA Canada, and they're definitely pushing out a lot of information regarding their products. But there's no conversation. It doesn't mean anything. It's not topical. So that's not the way we want to be as a brand moving forward. You do want to do something more like this. So versus United and the previous, you have Southwest Air. So they've reached 1 million followers, a fantastic milestone and a great milestone. So they can celebrate that, but they can also do something with it. So having fun with it by creating a Twitter love code for a discount may not be much, but it's something that they could use to actually make it at least relevant. Also more relevant is Red Bull. Red Bull is certainly taking the opportunity to highlight them and their brand and their spokesperson, Lindsey Vonn. So not only did they make it resonant because she's on the Wheatie box, but she also just won a title in her sport. So that's pretty compelling and an absolutely relevant reason to send out a tweet referencing them and their spokesperson. So I don't know if anybody remembers this from a couple of years ago now. The city of Vaughan, there was an errant tweet that went out from the city's account. And clearly what had happened, and anybody who works in social media knows what had happened, and what had happened was that somebody mixed up the accounts and they went to tweet out something from their own personal account and they actually tweeted it out from the city of Vaughan account. Sadly, the city of Vaughan chose to do the wrong thing. Two ways. Firstly, what they did was they apologized for the tweet, which was fine, but then they said we must have been hacked, which is the laziest excuse that you will get from any parent, product, profile, or anybody else who does anything on social media or whose kids do anything on social media when they find something is challenging. Instead of just owning up and saying there was a mistake, they actually turned off their account for a long time before they actually came back online. What you want to do instead is do this, like Red Cross. And Red Cross is probably the best example of how to manage an oops on social media. So what happened is the same idea. Somebody tweeted out a mistake from the wrong account. They tweeted out a personal tweet from their own personal account, but sent it on their work account. So Getting Slizzard got a lot of traffic that day. So the person takes ownership for it, right? Rogue tweet, oops, was my inability to use Hootsuite. My mistake, now I'm embarrassed. So Red Cross responds with, we've deleted the rogue tweet, but rest assured we're sober and we've confiscated the keys. A great, lighthearted, fun way of acknowledging there's been a mistake, but not blowing it out of proportion. So what happens to Dogfish Head's Beer, who was referenced in the first tweet? They sent out a tweet to their base and asked people to donate to the Red Cross because of the way they handled that situation, and everybody did. So the numbers that they received from that goodwill movement and the goodwill that they received from that activity as well was a huge advantage to them. They could have dropped the ball. They could have totally lost it. And instead, they actually turned it around and made it a massive positive for them. So the Red Cross is a great example, the American Red Cross being a great example of a social brand. And this is one of my personal favorite examples of how easy it is to actually just make somebody smile. Now, I was traveling not too long ago and I had to make a pit stop on my way home. I was still about an hour, 45 minutes away from home. And this was my observation, right? Sometimes it's just a pit stop and McDonald's fries is all you need to cap off a good night. And look at McDonald's. They replied, and it just made me smile. So what I sent them was a gif from the office of a high five going on. And you know what? It was just a really simple way for them to outreach to me. Notably, I didn't mark them in my original tweet. I didn't tag their account, so they didn't know necessarily that I was talking to them directly. I didn't hashtag it or anything else. This is just an example of a smart company that's paying attention to who's talking about them, where and when, and responding in kind. You know, goodwill goes a long way, and it really does not take much. So we know what boring tweets do for us. It's like when we're watching Twitter and someone says, oh, I just ran 3.7 miles, or they tweet out, hey, I got 10 retweets this week. Nobody cares. This is not being a social brand. This is not engaging for the benefit of your audience. This is wasting people's airtime. So clearly, some brands are just more naturally social than others. And here are three great examples of what I mean by that. So, first, you have, of course, the sports brand in the Raptors, the Toronto Raptors, and their campaign, We the North. Now, this started, I believe, in 2016, maybe 2015, as something to rally the fan community around the Raptors as they were gearing up and heading toward playoff season. Then you have kind of the integration of Drake, and then the evolution of this notion of the Six, Toronto being referenced as the Six. And why is Drake so integrated in the Raptors brand? Of course, is because he's one of those celebrity ambassadors for the team, but he's also a local and he loves the team, and you can see it. So there's this like real grassroots, authentic, totally transparent kind of experience that happens with the Raptors and this We the North campaign. Then you have, of course, the goddess of all things community and authenticity, probably the woman who put the word on the map over the last 20 years, and that would be Oprah. So not only, of course, is it Oprah Magazine and the former Oprah Show, but then, of course, you have the Oprah Network and all of the products and all of the outlets that exist that are part of the OWN network now. Now, anybody who knows anything about Oprah and knows anything about her community and the people that she has speaking with her soul sessions and doing those kinds of interviews and whatnot, is she absolutely lives for this notion of authenticity and transparency. And she is who she is and as successful as she is because of the community of people that support her. Because clearly she tapped into something there and clearly they've responded to her. So again, a hugely social brand in Oprah and everything that surrounds her. And then, of course, another great example of a social brand is BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed, they have great articles, they have funny outlets, they've got wonderful videos that are fun and engaging and topical. They're also doing some incredibly hard-hitting journalism as well. So I don't want you to think it's just all kind of LOL and OMG, but something that's actually an important part of the BuzzFeed success is how they have a community element. So they allow people from their community to create content, and often that content is actually what goes viral and actually takes off and helps their brand as well. So clearly, BuzzFeed is winning that kind of game as well on the social brand front. So big brands will engage and do things from a social perspective. Here you'll see Wattpad, which is one of the more plentiful and really rich used writing platforms online, and they've done a lot of work with actually helping their independent writers find publishers for their really, really popular works. You can see Blackberry's there, and say what you will about Blackberry. It's a great Canadian company, and they are really popular online and do a ton of great work online as well. And their community is really quite engaged and very passionate about their products as well. Lululemon, of course, you'll find a lot of passionate yogis and wannabe yogis who use Lululemon's products. And, they don't just talk about their products. They really engage talking about their health and wellness. They share things from festivals. They talk about food and recipes. So they're really coming at it from a whole lifestyle brand perspective. Not-for-profits are certainly opportunities to use social channels in a really robust way. So you have memory morsels here and an example of Mars in Toronto. And, they're engaging with their audience, talking about products and showcasing their startups and their entrepreneurs. And it's a definite two-way conversation and an opportunity for them to show the impact of the work that they do to a greater audience. Foodies, of course, massive foodie audience online. So whether you're a producer and a chef, or whether you are a restaurant or a cafe or a coffee house, or whether you are just somebody who really loves eating food and sharing that. There's a ton of great foodie content available, and the foodies are naturally social and they share a lot of content. Here's a great example of personalities who are using social media to engage with their community as well. So on the left, you have Naheed Nenshi, who is the mayor of Calgary, and his is one of the best accounts to follow. He's a ton of fun and has even appeared in BuzzFeed because of his sense of humor. One thing that makes him so engaging is that, when someone tweets out and says, "I'm in the same restaurant as Nenshi," he responds and acknowledges them for who they are and how important they are to him. So a great example of how he uses social. There's been a few campaigns during the Calgary floods. It was very obvious how Nenshi was using the social channels to not only educate people, but to uplift people, to keep them informed, as well as to tackle some of the bigger issues that people needed from an emergency perspective, but also ongoing and helping the population in Calgary manage and deal with all of those kinds of issues. On the right, you'll see Amanda Palmer, who, for those of you who don't know, is an immensely popular performer. She is the first artist to reach $1 million on a Kickstarter campaign, which is why you may have be familiar with her. But the reason I enjoyed this tweet is because I was just tweeting out that I really admired what she had written during this scenario, and she acknowledged that. And that was really, she didn't have to, but that's one way that she actually keeps her community of people loyal and engaged, which is really important. Customer service. One of the best companies out there that actually manages their social channels for customer service is TELUS, and they do a really great job. Their TELUS support, at TELUS support on Twitter, may be one, it's a fairly repetitive stream in the sense that you'll say, "Hey, sorry that you're having a problem. Can you DM us so we can help you with this?" But they actually constantly get accolades for the work that they're doing as a customer service channel for their community. And I think it's a really smart way for them to do it. Other companies like Dell and the Weather Network can certainly use these as opportunities for people to understand when there's emergencies, when there's flooding systems, or how to engage just from a pure traditional customer support perspective as well. And local news outlets are using it as a way to engage and showcase things that are happening in their city, events, new restaurants, politics. There's a ton of great information coming in from the local scenes when it comes to these news outlets. And so BlogTO and Torontoist are two of the ones that have done it really, really well. So as I was saying before, not every product deserves or should be on social platforms. And you can see from these two meme examples, this would be a great rationale for that, right? So, we don't really need bounty wipes. We don't want to follow bounty wipes on Twitter. Not perhaps the right market for them. However, Pinterest might be the right demographic and it might be the right channel for them if they want to tell some more information about their brand story, because they can actually showcase their product as it's working, rather than doing some sort of kind of a name chatter on Twitter that really doesn't serve their overall goals and purposes at all. So let's start talking about social behavior and demographics and how this all ties into our overall strategy as a social brand as well, because they're not the same thing. When we talk about behavioral data, so we're talking about content creation or online criticism or commentary, that is actual interaction, right? And it is giving you insights into who your audience is. So rather than just assuming who they are or knowing who they are from a typical demographic, sex, race, and income only gives you so much information about somebody. It doesn't actually give you a fuller picture about who they are as your audience. So it's important to notice that behavior is really quite different than demographics. So one of the things I want to talk about tonight is behaviors and how important it is to recognize the different kinds of behaviors that exist. So Forrester Research did some research, and they came up with 6 different social media types of users. And so I want you to keep these descriptions in mind and tell us eventually in the Google Plus community, where do you fall? So they call it the social technographics, and they've broken it down into creators, conversationalists, critics, collectors, joiners, spectators, and inactives. So let's start from the top. Let's look at creators. So creators are people out there who will publish a blog, they will create their own website, they'll upload content to SoundCloud, they will write articles or commentary in an article that's online, whether in the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, or other outlets. And they are really engaged in an online conversation. They are jazzed in that conversation. They may be gamers as well. They are fully participating online. They are sometimes commenting on videos. They can be everywhere and anywhere. They could be commenting in text, they could be commenting in pictures, and they could be commenting in videos of their own as well. So the mediums they choose to use can be plentiful, and the places that they engage can be also quite plentiful. Conversationalists are people who once in a while will update their social network status on Facebook or on Twitter. And they could be going some back and forth, but they're not actually generating a lot of conversation. They're mostly responding to those kinds of conversations. Critics are people who like to post reviews and ratings on products or services. So you'll see a lot of these critics on Amazon or eBay, most especially. They will comment on somebody else's blog, but they're not necessarily creating their own content. So they can be commenting, but not, again, creating their own content. So they'll contribute to a conversation, but they won't necessarily initiate a conversation. So they could be on Reddit. They may not start the Reddit conversation, but they would partake in the Reddit conversation. Collectors, these are people who are digital hoarders in a way. So they will participate in the Webby Awards, which is an online award platform, project that's been going on for about 13 or 14 years now. And so they'll participate by critiquing and looking at different websites and voting for their favorite websites in those kinds of environments. They use RSS feeds. So they'll be tracking blogs consistently using tools like Feedly to keep track of content that's happening online. And when they are the collectors will also use tools like Evernote, and they will be tracking content, or Pocket, and they'll be tracking content, and they'll be using tags so that they can readily find that content, because it's like an internal mindset filing system for them to do that. Joiners are people who will often visit or join a social networking site, but they won't necessarily partake. But they have a profile there just to say that they're there. So some of you who may not be interested in using G+ outside of this course may be considered a joiner in this platform if you choose not to engage. But again, there's a ton of communities out there, so I hope that you would. Spectators, there's plentiful population out there of spectators, people who like to listen to podcasts, read the blogs, watch video, read online forums. They are content consumers. They get it, read it, partake in it, but they don't necessarily comment on it. They don't necessarily respond to things, and they're certainly not creating their own content. And then there's the inactives. So in Canada, we know that the inactives are only about 5% of the population. So they're doing none of these. They're not reading, they're not paying attention, they're not really impacted or affected by the digital world at all. So when we're talking about digital behavior, people of every age demographic income level, class background, race. They can come in every different size, shape, and flavor in each one of these different buckets. So digital behavior being very different from the demographics again, right? You can have two people who are of the exact same demographic, but they can actually play very, very differently along this social technographics ladder. So when we're building a strategy, it's less about who people are, although it's important to a certain extent when you're tying that into product, but it is really more about what they do. So that's an important distinction that I want you to keep in mind as we move forward. Now, speaking of personas, it just so happens that just recently, a friend of mine named Tara Hunt, who runs the web channel Truly Social with Tara, who's also been a social media expert for probably 10 years or more now, just released this awesome piece that speaks to personas and how outdated they are. This is a marketing tool that was used in the 90s by advertisers and marketers straight across the board. And she actually talks to how we have to look at people's behaviors and use that as a starting point when we're actually building out a social media campaign and program to support our brands. So if you want to take some time, click on the slide here, and you'll go to her video channel, and you can actually hear her interpretation and her argument in favor of moving away from personas and moving closer to looking at user behaviors online. So our jobs is really we want to select the right social media platforms and touch points because we want to be able to capitalize on these behaviors for our products or our projects or our events or our brands, whatever they may be. Strategy can be a really big, scary word. So what I want to do is I want to break it down for you guys. I want to break it down for you in the sense of terminology and language. I also want to introduce to you 4 different kinds of tools that you can use to help you actually build out a strategy for your project, your program, or your product. I want you to use these as tools that you can use to help answer and actually ask the questions that you need to as you move forward in trying to actually create a big plan for whatever it is that you want to support in social. So the first of the tools that we're going to look at is called the Forrester Social Marketing Playbook. Now, a caveat for you. We don't actually have all the research to be able to share with you. These reports costs anywhere between hundreds and thousands of dollars for access. But what we do have is the abstract to share with you that is in Blackboard, so you can access it from there. The value in this tool, though, is that what it does, this framework gives you a wonderful path to follow in the sense of which questions to ask and how to actually consider all of those different elements that are going to be required for you in successfully executing on a social media strategy. So the next few slides, we're going to actually look at each one of these different sectors and how you can use them best. So in the discovery phase, what you're doing is you're actually articulating your vision, you're articulating your landscape, and you're articulating your business case or your business situation. And what does that mean? So your vision is, who is your brand online, right? So part of that will be informed by the work you do offline, of course, who your brand is and what you're trying to achieve. But this is also very particularly and very specifically looking at how do you define yourself online? How do you want to be known? What do you want to be known as? And what's important for you? And that helps you set some goals as to what you want to achieve. The landscape talks about who's already there. So from a competitive perspective, who's your competition? From, where your challenge is going to be coming from? Who's going to be taking eyeballs away from you and your cause or your project or your product, right? Who do you have to contend with to get attention in this space? In the business case or business situation space, you're asking the questions is this worth my time? Is there a potential audience for me out there where I can actually gain attention and awareness and then achieve whichever goals you set out within these frameworks, within these social frameworks. So in the playbook sense, this is your discovery phase, and you can see that each one leads into another. In the plan phase, what we're doing is we're really starting to do the grunt work. So why are we online in the first place? What are we trying to achieve? So that assessment is everything that you are informed with from that discovery phase. So knowing who your competition is, knowing where your opportunities are, and then you're building that into that kind of comprehensive assessment that says, this is where you stand right now, and this is what you need to know before you move forward. It's really important to be able to articulate this rather than kind of hum and haw about who you are, what you are, where you want to be, and what your goals are, because this actually saves you a lot of the guesswork, that spray and pray as you move forward. From a strategic planning perspective, what you're going to do is actually outline very specifically how are you going to get to your goals. So it's about articulating your goals, and then how are you going to get to your goals. So what are you going to do step by step from a time perspective, right? So what happens in the first 3 months? What happens in the first 6 months? What happens in the first year? What are you going to do to get yourself to where you want to be? So the plan is not, of course, just time restrictions. You're also including tools and technologies, which happens in the act phase as well. So the stakeholder map, of course, is really important as well. This is where you articulate who do you need to consider that's inside your company and outside of your company. So that's your internal stakeholders and your external audience. So who inside the company needs to be involved in your conversations? Is it marketing? Of course. Is it programming and development teams? Perhaps. Is it operations and logistics? Probably. It depends. Every business is going to have a different kind of structure, and every goal is going to have a different number of team members who need to be involved in these kinds of projects and these kinds of goals. But you need to sit down and actually make sure that you understand who internally you need to be engaging to make sure that you're executing on these plans and these goals as you have them built and you're ready to make them come to fruition. The stakeholder map, a lot of people actually don't take time to do that work. And I have to tell you, it's probably one of the more important steps and one of the more important parts of you doing your homework in this kind of strategy mindset, right? Because this planning is so important. It helps you figure out who are you going to target in your work, how you're going to target those people, who needs to know what's going on, who you need in supporting you internally with customer service or sales or logistics or fulfillment, supply, everything. All of those different conversations, they need to be had. And this is a really great way for you to look at your organization holistically. And this is why I say to you that social media strategies or digital strategies do not stand outside of your overall business goals and strategies. They must be fully integrated to be realized in any kind of successful way. All right. So next part in our playbook is the action space. So we have to look at the organization. Again, who's involved internally, which teams will work together. How is this organization going to work as well? So organization also asks some of the how questions. Who's going to be involved with approvals? Who's going to be involved in decision making? So it's not just the stakeholders, but also which persons take on which roles and which accountabilities and roles and responsibilities within those spaces as well. Okay. From a best practices perspective, it's important to understand what your challenges are going to be and how you're going to set yourself up for success. So what does it look like? Is this where you're going to talk about how many meetings you're going to be having internally, or how many emails go back and forth between stakeholder groups, or which platforms you're going to be using for updating team members, which technologies you're going to be using, which of course plays into the next section, which is the tools and technologies. Are you going to be using Basecamp? Are you going to be using Google Docs? Are you going to be using email? Are you going to be using Hootsuite? Are you going to be using TweetDeck? All of these kinds of questions need to be asked in relation to one another, right? So how do you keep your organization organized? How do you keep the stakeholders engaged? How do you ensure that everybody understands what's happening in the social space? And how do you understand and how do you make sure that you have the right people ready to make decisions in a timely way? Those are all really important questions. And then optimize. So we can capture all of these activities rather in kind of the ongoing conversation about measurement metrics and continuous improvement. So this is where you say, what does good look like? What does success look like? So how do you build it, maintain it, and grow it? So, not only who's going to be doing the work, but how often are you going to be doing testing? How often are you going to be doing experimenting? How often are you going to be looking at the validity of those tests? Which platforms are you going to be using? Are you going to be going into, say, Google Analytics and using that? Or are you going to be looking at Twitter reports and analytics and using that? Are you going to be looking at Facebook analytics and insights and using that as your measurements? So that's part of that prior tools and technologies conversation. But that tells you which platforms you're using, which metrics you're going to be watching, and how you're going to measure those success in each one of those platforms. Benchmarking is pretty straightforward. What benchmarking means is where did we start and how are we growing and how do things look over a period of time? So how do things look on day 1? How do things look on day 3? How do things look on month 3? How are things going quarter after quarter? How are they looking year over year? Those are important considerations, and those are important metrics for you to track so that you understand that the work that you're doing is actually having some sort of an impact. And it's not just about the growth numbers, right? This is really very much about aligning benchmark metrics to your goals. So whether that's number of sales, number of downloads, number of leads, whatever that looks like, it's not just number of followers and likes and comments that you have on the social channels. That's not doing it right. That's doing the bare minimum. Those vanity metrics gives you the bare minimum amount of work. And we'll be talking about measurement, of course, later on in the course. But doing it right is tying it into your overall business health and what do you need to do to achieve that, okay? And of course, a continuous improvement is what kind of goals and what kind of metrics show you what kind of story, and then what do you need to do to continue to improve that? Okay, the next tool I'm going to introduce you to is called the Cores and Paths tool. Now, this is from a couple of writers named Jim Callback and Karen Lindemann. It's from a blog in 2012. But the blog itself is called Boxes and Arrows, and this is it's a journal that is dedicated to the pursuit of a dialogue on information architecture. Now, unless you're a super geek like me in this regard, and you love this idea of information systems, you may not have found this kind of resource in your casual use of the internet on any given day. But this is a tool that I've actually used for a number of years in teaching this course. And the reason I love it is because this worksheet runs you through how to think about whatever it is you're thinking about, so your product or your project, from the inside out. So this isn't just to be used with regards to building a website. This could be for anything. So if you're running through this, you don't have to think just in terms of a website, okay? This could be a video, it could be a blog, it could be a picture, it could be an interactive game. It all depends on what you're actually trying to build. But what you're doing is you're starting with the core. And this is fundamentally why you're driving people toward you, why you're trying to draw them toward you. So I love the Cores and Paths tool for precisely that reason, is that it starts with the goal and then actually works from there. So let's see how we can use that for your purposes in this course. Okay. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at that center section, which is the core content and functionality. You're looking at this from either a website, a social presence, a project, or an event, and you're trying to actually articulate here, what are you trying to achieve? So this is where you start to actually state your goals. Okay. So there's two different types of goals, though, that you have to take into mind when you have to take into consideration, rather, when you're building any kind of campaign or any kind of digital profile or presence for anything. You need to look at your user goals and you need to look at your business goals. So you need to know who your user is. You need to know what they're interested in. You need to know why they're going to be trying to find you or why they're going to be engaging with you. What problem are you going to be fixing for them? What information are you going to be providing to them? What education are you going to be giving them? Which support are you going to be providing to them? Because that's the only reason why people would come to you from a social perspective, right? Is that you're providing something to them. Now that something could be a product, it could be support, it could be knowledge, it could be education, it could be a laugh, it could be entertainment. But knowing why your users are coming to you is really important. And those knowing those user goals is really quite different from your business goals. Your business goals could be, to be building brand awareness. That's one thing. It could be to have sales of a product. That's another thing. It could be to have attendees at an event. That's another goal, right? So they're not exactly the same. They may be intertwined and they will be intertwined, but articulating them differently ensures that you take the time to actually look at the desires and the wants and the needs and the goals of one group and in relation to another, but not one overpowering another, that they both deserve to have that kind of thought process and consideration at hand for themselves. Okay. So the next thing you're going to be looking at is inward paths. So inward paths are, how do people find you? And specifically for this project or for this, course, what we want you to focus in on is, how do they do it on social? So are they finding you through SEO? Are they doing it through Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Tumblr, Instagram? Which channels are they going to be finding you through? Are they going to be getting you from referral websites? Are they going to be getting you through newsletters? Are they going to be finding you through partnerships and alliance marketing opportunities? How are they going to be able to find you? We want to be able to start articulating that. And the trigger words is, we want you to start considering SEO. So that's search engine optimization. Now, I've mentioned it before last week that there's no way that you guys are going to walk out of this course being experts in SEO, because there are entire 7 and 14-week courses built around that framework. But what you will get from actually just building your knowledge and your social muscle in that sense is, you have to start considering, how are people going to try to find you? And this will start informing you in that SEO discovery and your own education in SEO as well. And then we're going to be looking at outward paths. And that may not seem like you should spend much time on this, but you really should be thinking of, where are people going after they've found you? So if they've come into your social circle, your social feed, then what are they doing once they're there? Are they leaving immediately? That's problematic. Are they clicking on content that's still yours but on a different channel? That's interesting. Are they going further through your product site because they're looking at complementary products or offerings to what originally brought them to your site or to your social channels? These are ideas that we want you to think about from a design process, right? We want to make sure that you're actually sending people to the right place and that they're not just coming into your social sphere and then leaving right away. So that's also where we have that call to action. So what are you asking them to do once they get into your social channels? Are you asking them to sign up for a newsletter? Are you asking them to download a white paper? Are you asking them to sign up for your email marketing program? Are you asking them to purchase something? Are you asking them to attend an event and register for a ticket? What are you asking them to do? So, of course, this is going to be different depending on which kind of focus you have, right? If you're doing this from all of those different examples, or if you're doing this from a website perspective, or you're doing it from a social perspective, there's different functionality that happens in both of these spaces. So the next great resource I'm going to be sharing with you is courtesy of Marie Poulin, the co-founder of Digital Strategy School. Marie built Think Like a Digital Strategist as a guide for people who are actually building programs and projects online. So what she did is that she adapted the SawStack model, which is a model that's been around since the 90s, predominantly used in the PR field. And what she did was she adapted it so that we could use it specifically for those considerations that we need to take into account as we're building product and or user experiences online. So we run through situation, objective, strategy, action, and measurement. But again, with those very specific questions that we should be asking for those issues that we need to consider. And last but not least, let me introduce you to the business model canvas. So the business model canvas was actually a crowdsourced book originally created a number of years ago. It's now a product that is owned by a company named Strategizer. And anybody who works in the startup space or is building a digital product nowadays would probably be familiar with the business model canvas. It's used and touted by people like Brad Feld and Steve Blank, and pretty much anybody who actually works in that space. Eric Ries, amongst others. But what I've done is I've actually taken the framework of the business model canvas and I've adapted it so that we can use it for our projects here focused in on social media. So it is a lean startup template and it's a visual chart. So think of this as like a business plan light. And we're using this to help really identify the key elements that we need to consider to take anything online and go live. So it's often used, as I mentioned, for building products, but we can really use it for any project as long as you actually know the questions to ask. And this is intended to be an iterative tool. And by that, I mean, we're going to work on a first draft, and that's going to be due for your homework in a couple of weeks. But then I expect you to keep coming back to this and adjusting this because your assumptions that you make in the beginning are going to be tested and they're going to change based on the information you get over the next 13 weeks. So don't be surprised when things that you thought you were going to be doing that you had framed in your business model canvas are actually going to change for your final project. So this is what the business model canvas looks like from a social media perspective. And the questions are really fairly self-explanatory. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over them, but I do want to highlight a few things for you. So there's different ways to approach this. And I'm going to go back a couple slides just for a quick second to show you that I've got numbers in the boxes there to show you which approach you should be taking and in which order. So for this model here, we are going to be starting with the customer segment, and then you're going to be moving into the value proposition. And then you're going to be answering questions regarding channels and customer relationships. And then you're going to focus in on your goals and measurement. And then it's going to be your key activities and your key resources. And then you're going to be looking at key partners. And then you're going to be looking at your costs. So to help you through this, I've created a template for you that's going to be available for you through Google. And you're going to be able to look at all of these questions and answer these questions on your own behalf regarding your project. So how are we going to use these tools together? So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using the Forrester Social Marketing Playbook as the framework for your final project. So if you've done your homework already and you've done reading in Blackboard about what's expected for the final project, you will see that there's two components to your final project. One of them is going to be a written component. The other one is going to be a presentation. So in that written component, we're going to be using the framework of the Forrester Marketing Playbook to actually write out what you're doing, what your project is, how you're going to go to market, all of those things. And we're going to be using that 4-segment framework for that. And then there's going to be the business model canvas component, which is this is the start of your really digging deep into your project and thinking about all of the elements that you need to take into consideration. The course and paths that I've shown you and the Think Like a Digital Strategist are supporting tools and content. And they're checklists, and they're also going to be important things for you to consider when you're designing something and how you're building an online experience. So, there's not 4 segments that you're going to have to fill out and use, but you should be using all of these tools together. So I have all of these resources. They're all linked for you so you can access them at any given time. I've also incorporated some other business model canvas resources from the Mars Discovery District, which has done an extraordinary job over many years of capturing a lot of content and presenting it in really accessible ways for you to dive deeper on this tool. And here's your homework for the next couple of weeks. So for next week, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be building your first infographic. And so what I want you to do is I want you to identify who you are as a social media user. So based off of the social technographics ladder that we reviewed earlier in this lecture, you're going to figure out who you are. And then there's a template in Piktochart. And you're going to use that template to tell the story of who you are as a social media user, and you're going to share that in the G Plus community, and that is due next week, and you're going to share that under week 2. And then you're going to read the Cores and Paths article and the Think Like a Digital Strategist article, and you're going to start your business model canvas first draft, which is going to be due the following week. Okay, so the infographic is due next week. But that first draft of your business model canvas that you're going to be sharing with me through your Google Drive, that's going to be due the week after. Okay. So best of luck. I'm looking forward to seeing the projects that you guys start to frame. And remember, these projects don't have to be anything real. They can be something completely made up, or it can be a real business that you're working on right now, which is really always advantageous because that means you can actually sink your teeth into something that you're really going to be using in the real world. If you have any questions, of course, bring it to the community. And I look forward to talking to you guys throughout the week. Thanks.